Good morning. Welcome to Mornings on Main. Today we're going to be talking about murals, specifically the 4 P's of murals. So that'll be planning, prepping, painting, and protecting. So we are going to do a panel discussion on each one of these. I will encourage you to actually ask questions as we're going along here. Caitlin will be monitoring those questions and we'll try to answer those as they come in. And so we'll have some time at the end also for questions. Just some housekeeping things. All attendees are coming in on as in listen only mode. You're automatically muted and not able to share your screen. You can also toggle with the audio functionality from your phone to the computer, especially if you're having Wi-Fi issues. You can toggle between the both of those. Underneath that mute icon there in that bottom left-hand corner. Again, type your question in at any time during the webinar, and then we'll read those questions and answer those questions in real time. But then, like I said, we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. Then if we're not able to answer all of your questions, all of the questions throughout the webinar, this is about an hour long here. So if we run out of time here, email any follow-up questions to me at ben@momainstreet.org. Before we get started, I wanted to do a plug for our quarterly workshop. And so that'll be Friday, November 4th. And this is all going to be on housing. And so every community has housing issues, it seems like, in one form or the other. And so what we're going to do is actually talk about not only upper story housing, but then also infill opportunities as well. So we're going to be going over appropriate rehabilitation and infill techniques and things you need to consider for that. What's appropriate use? What are some potential incentives to encourage partnerships? We're also going to go over pro formas, and so how organizations, Main Street organizations, can actually use pro formas when trying to figure out the viability of a project, but then also working with property owners on how to look at pro formas and what they need to do to actually go through the entire process to help kind of map out the cost of doing housing in the downtown. Also encouraging local development. And so who you see on the screen here is Jim Thompson. So he works for the Iowa Economic Development Center up in Iowa. And he is a huge economic vitality specialist for the state of Iowa. We've used him here in Missouri on many occasions when talking about economic vitality. And so he's a big expert in this field. And so we're looking forward to having him along with a couple of other people to be announced at a later time that have actually done some projects in the housing realm. And so we're really looking forward to this. This is a huge need that we have seen in our Missouri communities and in our downtowns to try to solve the housing crisis at least a little bit. We are really looking forward to this. So again, mark your calendar, Friday, November 4th. This will be an all-day workshop in Lee Summit. We're going to be on the west side of the state for this one. So let's get into murals here. And so I'm going to introduce our panelist for this webinar. And so the first is Angela Poling. And so Angela and her late husband Kelly opened Original Artworks by Kelly in March 1998. This gallery served as a mainstay for matting and framing in Chillicothe, Missouri and the surrounding areas. And then in July 2000, Kelly and Angela embarked on the business of murals. In 18 years, Kelly completed 61 murals in the Midwest. They worked together with communities and organizations that wanted to improve their downtown's aesthetic value. And then Angela's biggest claim to fame is bringing the love of her life, Kelly Poling, to Chillicothe. Then we have Jacob Duncan. And so Jacob has been a freelance mural artist since 2010, combining innovative airbrush techniques with traditional media. Born and raised in Excelsior Springs, Jacob has branched out to complete mural projects throughout the Midwest and beyond. And so with that, welcome guys. Thank you for joining me today on our webinar on murals here. Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming.
No problem. You bet.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to first get into planning as the first P of murals here. And so first, I'm actually going to put up a shot of a mural that Kelly did in Chillicothe. So Chillicothe is the home of sliced bread. And so at least for tourists, this may be one of his more famous ones here in Chillicothe. With Chillicothe being the home of sliced bread, the very first place ever to commercially slice and sell bread ever, which is just a crazy thing to me. I've been living here for 7+ years, and it's still, I don't understand how it wasn't a thing before this. So, and so this is one of the ones that Kelly was able to actually complete in Chillicothe. And then actually, this is one that Jacob was able to complete here in Chillicothe as well. And so this one actually depicts a lot of actually lost historical buildings in Chillicothe, and just giving a remembrance and a history to each one of these buildings as well. So let's get into, and I'm going to be cycling through some murals that are here in the state of Missouri as we're going through this presentation. So actually this first one is from Carthage. And so this depicts artists and famous people from Carthage. And so with that in mind, I'm going to ask you guys, and I'll start with you first, Angela. Why should a Main Street program or a community consider a mural? What are the benefits of having a mural in the downtown area and in the community?
Sure. Well, economic development is number one. So when you're looking at sustaining communities, I mean, economic development is obviously the priority. You know, when people come in and look at the murals, they're staying in our hotels, they're eating our food, they're participating in events, and they're seeing our lovely town, so that people will absolutely move to Chillicothe. I think that at the forefront is the biggest issue. Chillicothe's murals grew so greatly. The Visit Chillicothe, which is our tourism organization, we are now on the tourism circuit. So big greyhounds come through. I get on there and we talk about the murals in Chillicothe. And I think it's important that not only do people get to see the lovely murals, but they learn about them, and they're all historical based. 90% of everything that Kelly did across the Midwest was historical based to that community. So it wasn't, you just put up a picture. There was a lot of planning that went into that.
Yeah.
But economic development is probably your primary.
I agree. Jacob, in your mind, why should a community, a Main Street program consider art? Why should they consider murals in their downtown?
Oh, there's so many reasons, mostly what Angela just said, of course. I think a good set of murals can really set a tone for a whole town. And as she also mentioned, the historic element is important, because you do get to learn a lot about, the history of a place. And most of what I do is, involved with that too. Just looking up, old photos. I usually try to work with a local museum if possible, and, get some historic material, and you just kind of cram all that together, and hopefully it turns into something. But definitely you want to highlight those things. So, but yeah, that's about all.
I say in my experience too, and you don't have to do this in every single case, but like Angela said, each one of these, and like Jacob said, each one of these murals that I'm going to put up on the screen here, they tell a story of the town, of the community, of the county. And so they're not just pieces of art or some bright pops of color, and there's nothing wrong with that in its own regard, but each one of these tells a story of the community and why these things, whether they're things of the past, why they were important, or if they're things of currently, why they're important. And so visitors, community members can appreciate them and get to know your community a little bit better through these works of art. So it's really, really cool to be able to do a project like this, but also have such a meaningful purpose behind it as well. Next question is, everyone has their own style, their own method. No two artists are made the same. And so, Jacob, I'll start with you with this one. Describe kind of your style of art. What if you were to describe, this is who I am as an artist, how would you describe yourself?
I would probably think of myself as a draftsman, kind of. I do a lot of line work.
Mhm.
I get my early experience as a professional artist was airbrushing t-shirts, and I learned how to use this airbrush, and I found out that it was easier to paint on rough surfaces, especially brick, and you know, you come up against all kinds of textures and surfaces,
Sure.
and it's a little bit more efficient for me to cover the area that way. On the other hand, somebody like Kelly with just a traditional brush technique is also a very durable medium, and that is one of the strong points of that. So there's thousands of ways to do anything, but that's just been kind of my thing I fell into, was the airbrush mostly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Angela, yeah, Kelly's style was different than Jacob. So you
Yeah.
want to get into that?
Sure, I mean everybody's is, sure, yeah.
That's right. There's no wrong way, right?
Yeah, Kelly used I like his use of color
Mhm.
to as to really block out like those areas of color is
Mhm.
impressive to me. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Thanks, Jacob.
Mhm.
He really enjoyed the trompe-l'oeil kind of art, taking a two-dimensional wall and bringing a
Yeah.
third dimension to that.
Yeah.
Awnings coming off the building, and it's as if you're driving down the road itself.
Yep.
I know he did a piece, I believe it is in Bedford, Iowa, where he painted as if the brick was falling down and a rocket was going up through the
Mhm.
wall.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
he really enjoyed that dimensional type of work. And if you look at any of them, wherever he went, he has a version of that.
Mhm.
The last one he did in Chillicothe, he has himself standing on a ladder.
Yeah,
And prior to him finishing himself, we would get calls that he left his ladder up there when it was just him, a painted ladder. So he enjoyed that interaction with the community too, whenever, you know, people would stop and just in awe of that. But the trompe-l'oeil is kind of his way.
I get calls too with that one, Angela. Like,
Yeah,
Kelly's
I know.
painting at 9 p.m. I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him, but I don't think so. He's just really good.
Yeah. That was very enjoyable to him.
Yes.
It brought him great joy when people.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite ones, because Kelly was such a huge part of the artistic scene in Chillicothe. So to be able to paint himself in was just kind of the cherry on top for
Yeah.
that. Kind of like going back to what Jacob was saying too, no two artists are really the same.
Right.
And so I think it's really important for communities to kind of pick what style they're kind of wanting to go with before they pick the mural artists themselves, because all mural artists have a different process that goes into it. They have a different style. It's all going to look differently. So maybe my recommendation would maybe go to a town and say, that's something I think that would work in our community. That's something that that's the kind of style that we're looking for here. And then maybe find the artist maybe from there. Maybe we'll work with the local people to figure out who they actually used for the community there. So Angela, I'll start with you first. And so with Kelly, what was the process? How involved was he in the process of actually picking what the murals look like? How involved was he in trying to figure out what the mural was actually going to look like when he was in Chillicothe and when he was in different communities? How involved was he with that process? Or did it just kind of depend on the community and what they were looking for?
No, 99% of the time he was the nucleus.
Yeah.
And mainly because he's the artist and everybody relied on him from that perspective.
Mhm.
You know, working with systems, you know, committees, boards, all this, it takes a skill set.
Yes, sure.
Because
People, yeah.
and especially if it's a committee of all artists. So,
Yeah.
you know, because typically communities will say, we need someone with this expertise to be on this board. And so you're dealing with individuals who have a creative flair anyway.
Mhm.
So a lot of times what would transpire is they would all bring their ideas to him. And just as Jacob said, you know, research was the number one. I mean, he would spend countless hours in the museum, at the library, researching, taking their ideas and creating 2 or 3 sketches. And then oftentimes he would present them back to the board or committee,
Mhm.
and then they like this piece of that one, this one of that one, this one, and then he would, you know, conglomerate into one good sketch. The interesting thing, and I don't know how Jacob does it, but Kelly's sketches, so he would create something on a computer because how he sketched out something, nobody could tell what it was to him. And it looks like just a little line here and there. So he would create a model on the computer so people with layman's eyes could actually see what it's going to look like up on the wall. But he never used that computerized version to try to sketch out. He used these little sketches and nobody else could tell what it was. But, you know, his involvement, I mean, was the nucleus of any type of committee or organization that we worked with.
Jacob, how involved were you in some of that process? Is that kind of some of the same thing?
Yeah, it varies from the situation. A lot of times, if there's somebody that is just kind of like the guy down the street that knows you, you can get away with a quick sketch. If it's a bigger committee, there will often be numerous steps in a contract process saying, here's your first sketch, and then it goes incrementally from there. And so there's a lot of different processes to go through a lot of times. And like Angela was saying, oftentimes there will be a committee of artists, and I find them to be the most difficult because they're also opinionated. Other times, if you go, you know, people you'll hear this all the time. Oh, I can't draw a straight line. You know, all I can draw is flies. Just go. We trust you. Go ahead and draw this. But yeah, often it'll be 2 or 3 versions of a sketch before I get anything finalized, because I'll often just take a Photoshop layout and just put everything where it kind of needs to be and do a line drawing over the top of that, just for kind of a quick sketch. And usually that works pretty good for me anyway. And I had good results. But
so what you're saying is to be open whether you're an artist or not.
Yeah,
what's being presented.
It's communication is important.
Right. Yeah,
Always.
good communication.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, that was always my mantra too, was just to make sure to be open, because I was a guy that could never draw a straight line anyway. So I don't know.
Sure. I mean,
what I was doing. So
it's just something that I hear every day, you know.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Anyway.
But I always knew I needed to be open, because my ideas were never going to be as good as the mural artist, and I needed to be okay with that, and to make it a conversation as opposed to nitpicking.
Everybody has something to contribute.
Sure.
So I try to keep my ears open all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it nitpicking, just because you have to take value out of everything that someone says.
Sure.
And so, you know, I'm gonna leave it at that. But I think it's important, and like Jacob said, always have your ears open, because you just need to take what they're trying to say and what they're trying to get across and what they're trying to tell you what they want.
Yeah, because I guess in the end it is, I mean, it's their art and
Correct.
community, and so they may have
it's their product.
Right, exactly, and they may see things a certain way. But I guess as long as it's set in the right vein, set in the right tone, then it's a conversation as opposed to
absolutely
with it. So let's move on to prepping, and so I'm going to go to our next one. So this is from Joplin, and so this is their welcome mural coming into their downtown, but then also they're on the Highway 66 corridor, and so they have a mural that kind of highlights that, and so going back to their history, but then also welcoming people into the community. And so we've gotten into this a little bit, but Angel, I'll start with you. How would Kelly prepare to paint a mural? Would he usually sketch it out? How many different iterations would he have before he actually gave a recommendation to a committee or board or whoever he was working with? So just kind of take us through that creative preparation work before and then also during the mural painting process itself. What would he do when he actually got to the space that he was going to paint on?
So I think it's important for us to talk about the surface and the wall that it's painted on. He used to have a saying to the committees, you pay me now or you pay me later, because the importance of preparation of the wall is direct correlation to how long the mural is going to stay. And things that a lot of times people didn't think about is tuck pointing of the wall itself. So water didn't come down, but behind the wall, and then punch out nails and boards that it was painted on. And the older the town, the older the building. And so in some cases, communities chose to build a wall in front of the wall. Chillicothe has one of those.
They do.
And
So they do. You're correct.
Yeah. And it was the best surface he ever painted on, he said, and it took 3 times the paint because it would just soak it up, but it's never, it's staying there for a long time.
Sure.
So I think it's important that whatever committee decides which wall, that they have someone look at that wall, because if any water comes down, repairs are going to have to be made later on. So the better the surface, the more complete that building is, the better off you're going to be. Maybe the community just wants a mural to last for 5 years and not 20. That's totally on that community. So that would dictate what type of wall you use as well. So I think that's important. As for preparation, as I said before, he would spend hours in research and working with the committee, and that's where I came in. And especially initially when he started out, because he was a humble guy and he loved talking one-on-one, but he was not a public speaker. So he and I embarked on this endeavor together, and my main responsibility was try to communicate his ideas. And working within that system. And then at the end, he was doing it all by himself because he became so comfortable in his knowledge base. But it's difficult to jump there if you're not a public speaker and you just, that's not you. And then, once he started, a lot of times he would, if it was in the winter or in the summer, he would paint in the mornings. Just because of the heat on the wall, the paint not adhering very well. And then he would go to the gallery and work in the afternoon. But, initially started out on scaffolding, and that didn't work very well for this one because these buildings are 100 feet tall and he's up on scaffolding without the light on. And so we eventually got a man lift, so that was nice in regards to being able to actually move through the product quicker and not having to get up and down off the scaffolding. So I don't know if I diverted from your question, so I apologize.
Not, that was perfect.
Okay.
Jacob, kind of take us through your creative process. What you do.
Yeah, like you were saying with the wall prep, you definitely want to make sure you have somebody look at it that is knowledgeable, especially with historic buildings. I had an experience with one where it was a historic brick building, and due to the historic code or whatever, they wouldn't allow paint to be on top of the brick. And so what they did, what a lot of towns are doing now with different installations, are these aluminum panels
Hmm.
And they're only maybe like a half-inch thick, basically a laminate printed panel. And that gets into more of like a digital design area. And I've had some speed bumps with that because I wasn't the most proficient in Adobe Illustrator, for instance, or a vector-based program. And so there was a whole other learning curve to that. But besides that, as far as traditional, paint goes, you do want to make sure that everything is compatible. Like you don't want to have like an oil base or an enamel, for instance, underneath an acrylic paint because it won't stick, And so you just want to make sure that the wall's prepped. If it's not, you usually want to have some kind of a primer on it if it's not already painted. And that's another thing, like she said, you can pay me now or pay me later, because if it's not prepped right initially, then you will have problems down the road for sure. In one instance, I did a mural where they had removed a downspout, and this strip of paint had a enamel on it that I didn't know about, and I ended up having to go back and fix that later because it had peeled off. So just things to be aware of, basic stuff like that. Also, yeah, and she said that they acquired their own lift. That's another thing to think about in the initial stages, is that if it is a large building, a lift rental cost is probably going to be included in all of that. So most of the time, unless it's anything over 12 feet tall, I usually need to have a lift, and since I don't own one, I try to get that up front with everybody, you know what I mean? So
Sure. Yep. That makes sense. And we kind of talked about, actually, my next question too was things to consider before you actually paint the building. And so in my mind, that's one of the more important things that people just kind of forget, or they don't do it right. And so in your guys' experience, is that something that you guys help to bring to light? Like, hey, make sure that the brick is in good condition here, or make sure that there's nothing on the top of the building where water is going to be able to leak down. Is that something that you guys bring to their attention? Is that something that you guys do, or do you guys recommend that a contractor comes in and works on that? I'll start with you, Jacob.
It's usually a separate, I try not to deal with that part of it, but yeah, you do want to at least, if they're not already aware of it, to get that across. But sure, most of the time I'll have someone else base coat the wall. If not, it's going to be, a separate charge basically from the actual mural, And a lot of times you can get a professional, paint crew that's going to be cheaper per foot, per square foot than I could do on my own. So that's another thing to think about.
Angel or Kelly have a different kind of prep when it comes to making sure that everything was done before he actually went in and painted the mural itself. Would he consider anything else with that?
Yeah, that was always in our beginning spiel, for lack of a better word. Whenever we would go meet with communities, we would talk about that. And I talk about that on the tours, because I mean, that is a knowledge base and a skill set that people need to understand. And if you have never been involved with such a thing, you wouldn't even think of that.
Sure.
Kelly always went and inspected the wall prior to, and we used to joke that, I mean, he had a good knowledge base, just probably like Jacob does, just because of his constant work on the walls. But he didn't do any in the inspections. He did do some of the repairs, if they were minor in nature. So, but other than that, it was somebody else that he would say, you need to do that, because we really didn't want that liability. We didn't want the liability to be a part of the inspection process. And when we are not licensed, we, are zoned to do anything like that. So, but we gave the suggestions.
Right. For me, the important thing is that sometimes make sure you listen to those mural artists, because they've in many cases they've done this before, and so they kind of know what they're looking for beforehand, whether it's making sure that the capping is right so no water gets in behind it, that the brick's in good condition so it doesn't start flaking off 3 months after the mural, and then your investment is already literally flaking away at that point. And so just make sure to keep those things in mind, build that into, like Jacob was saying, build those things into the cost and the preparation, the time for it too. We used to always like to start early in the year, and so we had plenty of time if we needed to do some of that preparation work. We had plenty of time to get it done during the warmer months before it, got cold and it just wasn't conducive to actually paint a mural or do those repairs that were needed on there as well. What happens if the wall is not properly prepped or there is no maintenance schedule with it too? Jacob, in your experience, have you seen a wall that wasn't properly prepped and then they were like, nah, just go for it, just paint it, it's okay? Did you see anything? Have you ever seen anything that's you're like, oh, I could have told them about that earlier, or I did tell them about that earlier and they just didn't listen to it? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
let's talk about like what happens if you don't do it right.
The big thing is people try to cut corners, and that's when you get in trouble. For instance, the big facade renovation that I did downtown Chillicothe on the Edward Jones building, they had like these faux windows painted onto the boarded up windows. Is what they wanted me to do. So, but by the time I went up there and looked at them, and they were rotted out. You remember this? You had been working there, and those boards were in such deplorable condition that there was no way I was going to paint on that. So I had to replace all of those at a substantial cost and a lot of laborious process. But anyway, I was glad I was able to remedy that, but a building as old, especially these old buildings, a lot of times they do need a lot of prep work beforehand. Tuck point, as you mentioned, like there were birds flying in and out of holes next to the windows, and
probably not good.
At a certain point, that becomes outside of my purview as an artist. To somebody say, hey, can you pull that bird's nest out of there and put some mortar in that? I'm not getting paid for that specifically to be
my contract.
So, but anyway, I do try to remedy anything I can while I'm there. But yeah, that can always be an issue for sure. Yeah.
Caitlin, do you want to get into the question that we had in the chat there before we move on?
Yes, for sure. So we had a question. It's specifically regarding the pictures here from Joplin that we have shown, but it is something that I think both Jacob and Angela can speak to, just talking about the different kinds of painting surfaces and what works best. I know obviously we've talked a little bit about brick, and Jacob mentioned I believe it was aluminum sheeting that he talked about, but this one talks about different painting surfaces, mentioning specific plywood. Is there anything else that communities can use? What do you recommend? And is there, maybe something that is more easily like hung on a building, or maybe could be something that would, work on a building without actually, let's say, painting the building itself?
Well, don't use plywood.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be my first thing. Concrete board is really a great surface to play. So if you're going to build a wall such as what's in this picture here with I'm assuming that's a Corvette, something along that line, in front there, that is, yes, they've put up a wall to paint on front of that. Cement block is used a lot. There's some of the old buildings that have cement block. Stucco, you can paint on anything. It's a matter of the preparation. And going back to the last question, if he was up on the wall and saw something that he thought was going to be an issue later on, he would come down and have an immediate meeting with at least a couple of the committee members, saying,
Mhm.
listen, I don't think you want me to go any further until this is
Mhm.
repaired, or, you know, and then it's up to them to make that decision.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, sometimes, you know, they were like, just keep on going. And we're like, okay. But, you know, so you can paint on literally about anything. Kelly even painted on a corrugated barn. The worst experience
No.
ever on the
Never,
face of this
never again.
earth.
I
It
bet
was
that
a
messed with the
pig,
perspective a bit.
yeah, it was a pig farmer, and he wanted a picture of a pig right at the top and then a rainbow coming out of the pig. So he would get up there and he would have to come down and look this way, get back up and paint another strip, look this way. Look. It was the
Oh,
most
boy.
miserable experience he said he ever had. So I highly recommend don't do corrugated metal unless, you know, you can build a
Yeah.
wall in front of it.
Or pigs.
Yeah, I won't do it. I won't do it.
Yeah. Well, he
Sorry.
was a starving artist at the time, so
Yeah.
he was willing to do about anything.
That was actually gonna be my
I
follow-up
probably would
question. Is there any materials that you recommend not painting on? But
Yeah.
That would
there it
be
is right
one.
there.
Yeah.
Stucco is not the easiest thing to paint on, but you can paint on it. You just have to make
Yeah.
sure it's solid, because stucco will pick off and, you know, chunks come out.
One thing about stucco is that it does hold paint very well, if nothing else.
Yeah, nothing else,
yeah.
especially if the pieces are on the ground.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
Huh?
I remember with stucco, when I do stucco projects, we'd kind of like knock against it to
Yeah.
see if it was hollow, or if we hear that there's like water behind
Yeah,
it.
it's real porous.
Yeah, and you can tell. I mean, there's many times I'd walk Chillicothe with Kelly and just kind of like knock on it
Yeah.
and just see.
Well,
But
you don't see a lot of stucco in the Midwest, just because Midwest has 32 freezings. And
Mhm.
so, you know, the buildings have to move, the paint has to move in and out, and, you know, stucco just doesn't have the capability to sustain
tough.
itself a lot like other buildings.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to my next point too. There are specifically, depending on the building material itself, there's going to be different maintenance patterns that go with it. With stucco, like Angela was saying, there's so many freeze thaw cycles that if you're not careful, then it'll pop out or it'll start bowing a little bit weird. And so this actually goes to the last P, but I'll jump ahead a little bit. And so we'd always have some kind of maintenance schedule where we would walk around at the beginning of spring to see what winter, how it wreaked havoc on any of the murals if it did in and of itself. And so while you should definitely have a plan before and during the mural process itself, have one afterwards too. It's really important to make some kind of yearly maintenance schedule to figure out, okay, this is going to be my problem mural, or this is going to be one that we definitely have to do some touch-up painting with it, because what you don't want is it to become an eyesore and or to become more expensive down the road because you didn't do the maintenance 3 years ago with it. So Caitlin, did we have any other questions in there before we move on?
We did have a couple, and they're kind of the same question really, about the budget. So I know this is all really subjective to, of course, the artist, to the community, to the location of the mural, but kind of wanting to give some like rough estimate or how a community can go about getting a rough budget for a mural as they get started on a project. So something like a rough square footage per calculation range, just based on wall condition, detail of work, something like that, if either of you have some input on that.
Well, Jacob may have more specifics. The one thing that I really want to be able to tell everybody is that it doesn't matter how big your community is, you can afford a mural. And, you know, we've got small communities around Chillicothe that don't even have 2,000 people in it, and they have multiple murals there. One of the things that we used to do is that we would work with the committee, develop a design. The funding source is really important. Chillicothe is very lucky because it has a lot of foundations, but a lot of the murals in Chillicothe were funded by individuals or groups. We had 3 Girl Scouts who wanted their gold award and came to Kelly and I and asked if they could somehow fundraise to be able to have a Girl Scout mural.
Super cool.
And so we worked with them. Of course, we forgave a portion of that, but it's important that 3 Girl Scouts, seniors in high school, raised money. And one of the murals is in Chillicothe,
Yeah.
is in honor of the Girl Scouts.
Mhm.
So really to put a limit on, well, we can't do this because we can't afford it. Don't have that mindset. Have the mindset that we want to beautify our community.
Mhm.
This is how we want to start. And if the large mural that you want isn't going to work, start with a smaller one. Build on that. Create some foundation for beautifying your community, because anything is possible. Don't go into a project thinking I'm not going to be able to afford this, because you never know.
Jacob, do you have any other thoughts with that?
Absolutely, yeah. There are so many different ways you can fund things. I worked on a wall that was owned by a Masonic temple, and they raised money by auctioning off prints of my actual mock-up.
No, that's
And,
cool.
and
Oh,
so
that's cool.
they would sell those for $50 a piece. I signed them all. They raised a lot of the money, most of the money for the mural from that, and also private donations. And there's so many ways to go about it. And also, just in response to the general question, my kind of, as a rough idea, let's say you have 1,000 square feet to paint. I'm gonna probably come in maybe $6-7 a square foot. Although that varies, a lot of times it'll go higher than that depending on the project. A lot of that depends on the size of the wall, and if it's a really tall thing, then I'm gonna need a larger lift, and it's a significantly more amount of work.
Mhm.
For instance, when I was downtown in Chillicothe on the hotel mural next to the donut shop,
Mhm.
I use a projector to set up my sketch a lot of times, and I'll do it in sections. But this one section, this donut shop was right in the way, and I was up there at night, and it was wet with dew, and I was trying not to fall off of it. What I had to do was rig up like a platform to set my projector on the roof of this donut shop, and to get my projector in the right spot. So that's just one of the things you have to think about, like if there's obstacles, and if there's access problems, like if you're in an alleyway, for instance, or if you're going to have to drive a lift through an area, you want to make sure that you have access. And those are just things that are unpredictable a lot of times. But
Sure.
anyway,
we use size and detail
yeah,
as some of our guide for figuring out how much to charge. Previous murals, and inflation, all those types of things went into it. One of the other fundraisers that was completed was there was a wall with just these boarded up windows, and the community sold those for, I think it was 2,500 for the top ones, 1,500 for the middle ones, and 500 for the small ones, and they were sold out within a week. So that in itself, I mean, so again, fundraising creativity should not limit being able to beautify your community in some form or fashion.
All right, let's move on. So this next example is from Cape Girardeau. This is actually their flood wall. And so the picture on the top left is actually the part of the wall that faces the river itself. This is new. This is actually something that was just completed here in this past year. So it's a really nice welcome to Cape Girardeau sightage that you can see from the barge or from across the state over in Illinois if you're coming that way. And then on the other side is a depiction of famous Missourians itself. And so this is the part of the wall that actually faces downtown. And so again, a lot of different surfaces you can paint murals on as long as you do it right here.
I was just down there and had the opportunity to see it. It's gorgeous.
Isn't it cool?
Yeah, it's very,
cool.
very nice.
Yeah, it's very cool. They had a local artist actually do it there. So really, really cool project for them. let's get to the third P here. And so I'll combine a couple of the questions here. So let's get to painting. What kind of paint is best for a mural? Jacob, you mentioned earlier not trying to mix different kinds of paints because that would not be conducive to it. But Angela, what kind of paint would Kelly use and why?
Without question, it's a Benjamin Moore historical base paint.
Mhm.
So the idea of creating murals in Chillicothe actually came from a gentleman who would frequent Lake Placid, Florida. And Lake Placid, their whole seawall is just full of murals. Came back and said Chillicothe really needs this. Well, he had to do so much research because Lake Placid is, that air is salty from, all that kind of stuff. So we have found the Benjamin Moore historical base paint holds its paint. We did a mural in 2000, the very first one. He's touched it up one time. And it faces the sun. And what he touched up was just the sky. And when he did that, it brought out all the colors down below.
Yeah.
It's the oldest mural in Chillicothe at this juncture.
Mhm.
But there are so many, like the one that I talked about, him painting on a wall that was built in front of another wall.
Mhm.
That color still remains. It's beautiful, it's deep, and that's what Jacob was talking about, is Kelly's colors are very, very strong, very historical maroons, that basis of the colors.
Yeah. Very vivid, I would say.
You
Yeah.
guys recommend doing an oil-based over an acrylic, or does it really just depend on the location? Does that really matter? Jacob, I'll start with you. You have any thoughts on that?
I wouldn't recommend any kind of an oil base. Although there are mural artists that use a urethane base or a spray paint, in other words, like more of a graffiti style, and some artists do that. I don't know if anyone is familiar with Psych Style from KC. He does a lot of the graffiti style, all rattle cans, and that's a whole different paint, different style of. In that case, you would want to probably prep the wall differently, and I'm not as familiar with that. But there are basically two approaches if you take that into account, as opposed to a urethane, spray paint. What I do more traditionally is just that outdoor acrylic latex, and that's usually holds up pretty well. Usually, although with the airbrush, there can be more fading at times if it's like you mentioned, facing the sun, especially if it's a western facing wall where the evening sun will hit it, will have more of a detrimental effect, I found. But usually it's a lifespan, maybe 3 to 5 years, that you might want to touch up in between, at least, so.
Angela, what would those Benjamin Moore paints, what kind of paint was that?
I knew you were going to ask me. And I can't answer that question, but I can get back with you and let you know. All I know is a Benjamin Moore historical base paint, and it is the only thing he ever used.
Yeah.
Most likely, it's usually an acrylic latex mixture. The exterior mix, which you can have tinted, anywhere, but that's what I've had the best luck with.
I like what Jacob said.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Have you guys ever been part of a mural where the community helps with it, like those paint by number type of, and so how has that process been a little bit different than, say, trying to pitch them a couple of different ideas? So kind of walk me through what that looks like and kind of the benefits of maybe getting the community involved a little bit more in that process.
So I think you're talking about the mural pop-ups.
Yeah.
And Joplin, one of those down there was that there is a group of individuals that go across the country and they will sketch out, and then local artists come in and they actually paint it. So the community involvement. Kelly didn't do anything like that, but he did work with 2 other individuals in Chillicothe for one of the murals. And when the committee came to him, he was swamped. I mean, he had like 3 murals already that he was doing out of town. And they really wanted this one to get going. It's the Jenkins Hayrack mural. And so 2 local artists got together and did the design and the colors and this kind of stuff. And then Kelly just painted it. And so it is the one and only community-based mural in Chillicothe. And you know, Kelly got along with everybody, and particularly Scott, and I think it was John, that he worked with. And you know, Scott did the design and the colors, and then Kelly just painted it. So
And so we do have one question here too, talking more about getting youth involved. So you mentioned working with Girl Scouts for fundraising, but do you have any experience, either of you, working with getting youth involved on a mural itself and a youth project? So have you done that, or what are your thoughts on that?
we never did that, but we spent a lot of time in education with the 6th graders, mainly because they were at that age where they could, you know, understand and sit still and understand some of the importance of the history of Livingston County. And then, you know, Kelly was infamous for putting his family's names hidden in the murals. So we would make a Quizlet up and work, and then they got a bonus point with their teacher if they found any of the names, this kind of stuff. You know, so as for doing a mural, no, but to kind of put a plug in, we're going to have the first annual Kelly Pulling Art Fair next year in October, and we are specifically having a youth section to promote, you know, the nonprofit that we have is just to promote education of the arts in the community. And so we are specifically focusing on youth in that art fair as well. But as for them actually helping with the mural, no.
I haven't worked with any kids per se, but we did do the piano crosswalk. And we got some people together and did that. There's a lot of different ways you could include people, like you mentioned, the color by number process. Really the 5th P of all of this is kind of performance art. Because anytime you go outside and do anything, people are going to be looking at you. And part of the whole process of doing this, at least for the artist's point of view, is engaging with the community in a way. And
yes, for sure. Well, it looks like we might have lost Ben, but we will continue on with our last few minutes here. We had a few other questions come in with the question box, and I know we had a little bit. I wanted to just get your guys' thoughts on protecting of murals. And so, you know, just the maintenance of that. Any last thoughts on that component of murals? Because of course that is a big piece of it after you've gone through this whole process of fundraising for murals and getting them installed, making sure that they last for your community. So Jacob, I'd start with you.
yeah, like I mentioned earlier, at least on the projects I've been involved with, you kind of have a lifespan of 3 to 5 years that you really want to get on at least resealing the paint. And I know Kelly didn't use any sealer on because of just the integrity of his process that he used. He didn't really need any kind of a sealant. I use a product called Rain Guard. It's a paint sealer, and basically you just spray it on. It's really simple to apply. It doesn't cost a lot, but I do recommend at least every 3 years that you reapply a sealer. And in my experience, I have had to go back and touch things up just from fading. It doesn't matter what you do, paint is going to fade eventually, just from UV rays and different things. The sealer I use does have like a UV blocker, but again, those are going to break down over time, regardless of what you do. So those are always things to keep in mind. Like Angela mentioned, you want to have a maintenance schedule or Ben, what Ben was talking about, you want to have that built into your plan from the get-go. So that's what I would say.
So Jacob's right, Kelly never sealed any of his, and we had a touch up. There's two things that you can't control, and that is the age of the building as it gets older. The other thing is Mother Nature. So, and we recently have an issue in Chillicothe due to some very, very strong winds that came through with a mural that he built on concrete, or he painted on concrete boards. So he never did that. And, but who would have thought I would have lost him at that age? Because, the whole plan was for him just to continue to touch up his paint. So finding people that can use someone else's recipe, just like a cook, and paint the way that Kelly painted is not necessarily an easy thing. And as I've heard of a product, and I'm gonna share it, but I haven't done any research on it, so I really don't want credit for it. But
Either way,
it's called Mural Shield, and from what I understand, it brings back the vibrancy of a mural. So it doesn't repair it, of course. So if repairs like Jacob was talking needed to be done, those need to be done first. But a faded mural, from what I understand. So I've asked some questions and I haven't gotten any answers yet. So that's a product that someone maybe want to look into. Are you aware of that one, Jacob?
I'll have to check that out. No, I hadn't heard of that. It's probably kind of like a clear coat type thing, or
yeah, I don't know. I mean, she just sent it to me right before I got on this webinar, because I'm, so
I'll check it out. Yeah.
So folks, well, first, sorry that my internet decided to crash right before this. And second, we're getting towards the end of our webinar here. So any final questions that you guys want to put in there, please submit those and we'll see if we can get those answered. But while we're waiting for you guys to do that, first I wanted to mention a lot of communities have some kind of way to light the mural itself. So it's not something that you can actually see during the daytime. So this is actually an example from Warrensburg. This can happen in many different ways, whether it's gooseneck lighting, or there's some that project from the building. If it's like, say, like a parking lot and you have a mural on one side, you can have, lighting that comes down and shoots down on it from there. So there's a lot of different ways to light it, but it also just provides you an opportunity to enjoy that piece of art at night. And so if that's something that you're considering, make sure to try to build that into the cost of the mural itself, the entire project. While it's not necessarily what's going to be put in the bid for the mural itself, build that into the cost of the mural, just like you would with some of the maintenance, perhaps beforehand and afterwards as well. So just wanted to give you guys an example of that. Any final questions? And then anything, any final thoughts, Jacob and Angela, anything we didn't hit on that you want to speak on either before the mural process, during the mural process, or after the mural process that you think people need to know before we close this out?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity. Any chance I can get to talk about Kelly's work it's important to me from a personal standpoint. But I think, keeping the love of art alive and not restricting yourself when it comes to creative thinking, reaching out to resources that are available. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm pretty darn good with the process. Right. So I don't mind getting my brain picked at all at any particular point. And I'm very quick to say, I don't have a clue. But I'd be willing to help. I mean, so, there's a love in communities for art, and, we really need to take advantage of, the momentum of moving arts forward. So any chance I can help, I'll be glad to.
Yeah. Jacob?
I can't think of anything. I just want to thank Angela for sharing her knowledge of all this experience you have is humbling. So I'm just going to listen and learn
Thank you, Jacob. I'm glad that we have a mural of yours in Chillicothe.
Yeah.
Thanks for working with me, guys.
You betcha.
So I wanted to, just before we close out here, again, give a plug for the quarterly workshop Friday, November 4th in Lee Summit, exploring upper story housing, info opportunities, really just housing in general. So be sure to sign up for that. That is coming around the corner, but at least put it on their calendar. It should be a really, really good one that is relevant to any community, to any downtown, not only the state of Missouri, but also I think nationwide as well. And so this is actually our last Mornings on Main webinar for 2022. And so in a follow-up survey, if you wouldn't mind giving some suggestions on some potential 2023 topics, we would appreciate it. But with that, Jacob, Angela, thank you. Thank you everyone for your thoughts, for your questions, and you have a great day. Thank you so much, guys.
You guys
Thank
too.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.